Yes, sir. So we can receive the lesson, The Enemy by Pearl Esper. And of course, we have completed first page, right? From the beginning, it's like a recapitulation. I'm just reading, it's a quick reading. You can also travel along with me, right? So it is the time of World War II. An American prisoner of war is washed ashore in a dying state and is found at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor. Should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot? And then Dr. Sadahogi, whose house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast, where as a little boy he had often played. They are all coming, joining. And the low square stone house was set upon rocks well above the narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. As a boy, Sadova had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. And his father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, those islands yonder, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan. And where shall we step from them? Chadova had asked. Who knows? His father had answered. Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it. The second page, you can also see that. And Sarova had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. His father, who never joked or played with them, but who spent infinite pains upon him who was his only son. Sarova knew that his education was his father's chief concern. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. And he had come back at 30, and before his father died, he had seen Sarova become famous not only as a surgeon but also as a scientist. So here, because he was perfecting a discovery which would render bones entirely clean, he had not been sent abroad with the troops. Also, he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically. And for this possibility, Shadow was being kept in Japan, right? Up to that, we have completed. Then clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Saro watched the mist hide outlines of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house. Wreathing around the pines, in a few minutes fog would be wrapped about the house too. Then he would go into the room where Hannah, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. But at the door opened and she looked out a dark blue woolen hoodie over her kimono. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled and said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese, because his father would never have received her unless he had been pure in her race, right? And he wanted often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah. Sometimes we will also ask, right? Sometimes whatever we have done, something in one way we travel, like in a road not taken. Once we travel, that's all. We cannot go back, and of course, once again from the beginning, we cannot travel. Once already is completed, like we will also ask. It is like something maybe unfinished, unfulfilled, or unfinished, or we can go for some in imaginary classes. We will also ask. So here he also just always asking like that as he wondered, that means something he was expecting, that just he had that. He wondered often whom he would have married. You can underline the sentence, whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah. Then by what luck he had found her in the most casual way. It is something we can also consider that was his fortunate. That's why he met Hannah and she became his wife, and of course, and they started to lead a happy life. They were like happy couple life. We can also consider they had two children. You understand that? And now, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, and by chance, literally, you underline that. Literally means exactly at an American professor's house he met Hannah, and she was a beautiful girl. Like he met the professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students, and the students were bored had accepted this kindness. Sometimes it's like overdoing. So in the house, the American professor's house, right? The American professor and his wife had been kind people. You can underline that. Maybe it is related to textual questions. Textual questions you can write, the professor, American professor, and his wife had been kind people, and of course they were anxious, they worried to do something for their few foreign students. You can also underline and you write foreign students. Right, sir? Then we can see the professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students. You can underline the few foreign students, right? Sadavo and of course Anna and their classmates, like those who stayed in American's house, right? And the students, though bored, and of course they felt bored, too much of taking care. Carrying, and of course too much of carrying also will bore, like will also disturb. So they were taking too much of care. That's why, though bored, had accepted this kindness, and they already always worried for them. That's why they did something that totally disturbed, but anyhow they accepted that kindness, right? And Sarova had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house that night. So he was also sharing the things, the rooms you can also see, and he was describing that how they suffer, how they uh, experienced everything in American's professor's house. The rooms were so small, the food so bad, and of course the professor's wife so voluble. Underline the word voluble. Voluble means voluble in the sense we are taking that, maybe talkative, right? Talkative. 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 Talkative means no talking too much. That's why. So something in that also bored them. So here the rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble here, talkative, disturbing by her speech. But he had gone and there he had found Hannah. But in that, even that state, he also got that opportunity. That means, was fortunate. He met his wife, like, you understand. So, but he had gone and, of course, spent his years and studied medicine and became a famous scientist and, of course, a surgeon. He had found Hannah also, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. Something, he just expected that. Even he did prayer for that. That's why he would love her if it were at all possible. Possibilities are there means he also love. He also will fall in love with her, like, right, up to that. Now, so now he felt her hand. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him, even though they had been married years enough to have the two children. And when they were both of them, were standing in the veranda, and of course they were watching the seashore. And of course, while looking at that, here the narrator is sharing with that. So they had adequate years, like they lived a years old experience. So now he felt when she joined her hands. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him. And even though they had been married years enough to have the two children, they already had two children. For they had not married heedlessly in America. You underline the word heedlessly means carelessly, without the knowledge of his father, without the knowledge of Sadava's father, or of course Hannah's parents. They did everything very properly. They had finished their work. Underline the word. That means they had finished their studies in America. They had finished their studies at school and had come home to Japan. They returned, and of course, and when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. That means that was somewhat matured way. Everything they came to their houses. That means they returned to Japan, and of course they discussed everything with their parents and convinced their parents with their consent. They started to get. Then you arrange. They also arranged. It is like arrangement, right? They accepted, everybody accepted, so that the father had seen her the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. Although Sadavo and Hannah had talked everything over beforehand. They were very clever, they were very clear, they were too matured enough. That's why they did everything very formally. That's why here it was given that, for they had not married heedlessly in America, carelessly. They know, without the knowledge of the parents. They were genuine, right? And they were very perfect, and that's why they were perfectly happy. That means made for each other. You can underline that. Underline the sentence, they were perfectly happy. That means they were made for each other, and they led a happiest life. And she laid her cheek against his arm. That means that shows they were happiest couple. They were the happiest couple. Underline that. They were perfectly happy means made for each other, and they led the happiest life. So she laid her cheek against his arm. You understand? This is what the background. We got it. Now we can enter into the lesson. So it was at this moment when they were standing that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. You know, something in front of the house. Something came. So it came out. So here it was at this moment that both of them saw something black came out or come out of the mist. It was a man. You can underline the word. It was a man. Now you can also see the image how it was like. So it was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean, out of the ocean. Flung. Underline the word flung means you can also thrown away something. You know, thrown away. You can write that thrown away, and they were thinking that. So it was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean. Flung. That means in it seen to his feet by the breaker, to his feet by a breaker, like something, he was thrown here, maybe like, like a white horse. I think we can take that like a breaker, just, it's thrown away. And he staggered a few steps, that means, unsteadily walk. You can also underline the word stagger means something. He crawled like without, balancing himself. The staggered means unsteady. You can also write unsteady walk, unsteady walk, or something. He was crawling like. So he staggered a few steps, his body outlined against the mist, his arms above his head. Then the curled mist hid him again. Underline the word hid, hiding, hid them again. Who's that? Hannah cried, because he was a weaker will. Always they will surprise. They will also show their fear. They cannot show their courage while looking at something different. So in front of the house, someone was coming. Something, are crawling. It was totally different image. So who's that? Anna cried. She dropped Shadow's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. You can underline the railing of the veranda. So here leaned, what is the meaning lean? They of course bent, then leaned, railing. You can write, maybe it is like, railing like enclosure. That part they also just, supported. And over the railing of the veranda they came very closer, and of course now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees crawling. This is what already I tried, and I of course explained that. The man was, you can have a close to bracket and write even textual or extra. The man was on his hands and knees crawling. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. That's all. He was motionless. You understand that? He was an injured man. He was an escaped prisoner. Prisoner of what? Because during World War II, American, he was an enemy. And of course he came, washed up on in the seashore, and of course he came in front of their house and of course lied. So that's why then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. You understand that? Immediately they started to talk. Something discussed. Might have, maybe. We are always saying a fisherman forgets. Underline the word a fisherman, perhaps, maybe. Underline the perhaps means maybe. A fisherman, perhaps, Sarava said, washed from his boat. He ran quickly down the steps and behind him. When they saw, he understood that he was a fisherman, so that immediately he just went, right? So here he ran quickly down the steps and behind him Hannah came. You understand? Like a follower. Hannah came and her white sleeves flying. That is unnecessary. You don't want no shoes. Her white sleeves flying a mile or 2 miles. You can handle a mile or 2 miles away. On either side there were fishing villages. Of course, fishing villages, right? Either side, no issues, right? A mile or more than 1 kilometer, a mile or 2 miles away on either side, or either sides of the, or either side, they were fishing villages. But here was only the bare and lonely coast. You can underline the word bare means empty. That something far as fortunate, that, for the enemy that was, far fortunate, but for Sadava's family that was unfortunate. That's why in front of their house he just, came and of course lied. You understand? But so 2 miles away to either side, they were fishing villages, but that place was totally empty. But here was only the bad and of course lonely coast, dangerous with rocks. By looking at lonely place, lonely seashore, nobody was there except the wounded or injured man. The surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. That activity, that attitude, that, motion in the seashore, and everything he was just describing. The shore beyond the beach was spiked with rocks, Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. You can underline the word torn, and you write maybe collapsed, damaged, tattered, racked, anything you can write. He must be badly torn. Torn in the sense maybe collapsed or damaged or injured. You understand? This is what the condition while looking at the man. And they started to inquire. He was a very famous doctor in Japan. That's why, and of course he was a scientist too. So while looking at them, what was his con? Already told you that battle between two things: humanism and of course patriotism. So he was, since he was a doctor and of course a surgeon, and was a researcher or scientist, he has to do that. He had to help the human being or human soul. As a patriot, he has to hand them over to the police. This is what the condition, and of course that was the dilemma. So they saw when they came towards him that indeed it was so. They came closer and look at them very keenly. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red choking through. You underline the word red choking, bloodish. You can also write reddish, red blood, and of course even choking through. So he is wounded, Sadova exclaimed. So he was a doctor, so that immediately found, identified that. So he started to cry, shout, exclaim. He's wounded. Immediately he is wounded. So he made the haste to the man who lay motionless, his face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head, choked with sea water. He was in wet rags of garments. You know what is the meaning? He was, underline the sentence, he was in wet rags of garments. Garments. Sadova stopped, Hannah at the side, and turned to the man's head. They saw the face. While looking at the face, both of them, totally they were surprised because he was a white man. A white man, Hannah whispered. Underline the word whispered means here secretly she was sharing that. That means whispering. Here whispering in the sense very, very secret voice he was sharing. White man, of course, a white man means enemy. So white man here we are taking that why they were something discussed in a secret way. He was an enemy. That's why white man, POW, prisoner of war. That's why he just did everything. Then a white man, Hannah whispered. Yes, it was white man. The wet cap fell away, and there was his wet yellow hair, long, as though for many weeks it had not been cut, taken care. And upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard, and he was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. You understand? This is what the condition, this is what the state. You can also identify. So he came and of course lied in front of the house. They also went very closer, and of course they started to inquire who was him, who was he, and they came to know that he was a white man. That means for them, white man means an enemy. And of course, these are unchecked even in the cabin, even the dress code. While looking at that, he was a soldier and escaped a prisoner of war. Everything they came to know that. Now Sadava remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers, he began to search for it. This is, that is a tendency. That is a tendency, and of course, the characters of that characteristics. Character we are taking that doctors whenever we are, consulting with the doctor. Doctor will examine while they are speaking. So now Sadova remembered after checking and of course inquiring everything. He remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers, underline the word experienced expert here. He was very famous for clearing or recovery, giving recovery for wounds. That's why his expert fingers, expert here, experienced fingers, trained for that. He began to search for it, that wound, and blood flowed freshly at his touch. He understood that. Yes, of course, reason one. On the right side of his lower back, Sarovar saw that a gun wound had been reopened. You can also understand he was shot. So he identified, he came to know that, recognized he was shot by a gun. So here on the right side of his lower back, Sarovar saw that a gun wound. You can underline a gun wound had been reopened. Through that blood started to flow. And the flesh was blackened, that means becoming reddish, blackened with powder. Sometimes, not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended, and he was also chatting with his wife. So sometimes, very recently, now not many days ago, the man had been shot, passive, had been shot and had not been tended in the sense he was not taken care. That means something first aid, anything he needs now, anything, something he needs now. It was bad chance that the rock had stuck the wound, and of course he was sharing that it was bad chance. Not only he received a gunshot, and of course, but also he received something from the rock. So here it was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound. So something collapsed totally. He was injured. He was damaged by the gun and of course the rocks. Both collapsed. So he was in a state. Something deliberate. That situation was deliberate. Whether he will save or not a soul, it's a question mark, right? Oh, how he is bleeding. Hannah whispered again in Solomon voice. Underline Solomon. You know what is the meaning Solomon? Maybe it's like Solomon means you can write. Maybe very secret, or you can also go for very sensitive or serious. Right, Solomon voice. Oh, how he is bleeding. Because since she was a weaker will, always women will do like that. Women will go while looking at even bleeding, even they will go for fainting also. Something they will go to their unconsciousness like. So they cannot even sometimes they will take vomit. Retching will be there. Retching that induce and taking vomit while looking at blood. That is their tendency. Always they are behaving like that. So here, oh, how he is bleeding, Hannah whispered again in solemn voice. The mist screened them now completely. Something enough for a moment. The mist, the fog, totally screened, covered them now completely. And at this time of day, no one came by. That was his unfortunate. That was his fortunate. Who was fortunate? The enemy is fortunate. Nobody was there. Otherwise, they would have something done something for that. So the fisherman had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers. Underline that beachcombers means here those who are searching things in the seashore lake on the seashore lake. So beachcombers, you can also write beachcombers, searchers at the beach, searchers at the beach. They are selling that, so taking something, picking out, and of course they are searching, selling. By that they are getting the survival. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance beach hombers would have considered the day at an end. That means for them that was like holiday, so that nobody was there. For them somewhat okay, because nobody came to see that. Otherwise they would also go to the police and they will say the entire matter. So now they were thinking, what shall we do with that man? So here he was asking, what shall we do with this man? Shadow muttered. So he was a doctor, so that he was just asking this question, discussing with his wife, Hannah. Hannah was next to him. Both of them were, watching, and of course, seeing the wounded or injured man. He was abandoned or given up. Nobody was there to take care of him. So something they have to do. You understand that was a position, that was a state situation. What shall we do with this man? Shadava muttered something, asked. But a strained hands seemed of their own will to be doing. You can underline the word. But a strained hands seemed of their hands' own will to be doing what they could to stanch the fearful bleeding. Underline the word stanch. To stop the flow of blood bleeding. While speaking, while discussing with his wife, he was just trying to control, stop the bleeding. That's why, but a strained expert hands seemed of their own will. That means he was trained for that. Those fingers were trained for that. Will be doing what they could do, stanch, stopping the blood. So here stands the fearful. That means to stop the flow of blood or bleeding. Stands the fearful bleeding. Then immediately he has done one thing. So he just packed the wound with the same moss that strewed the beach. Underline the word strewed. Strewed here we can also write maybe lie over. That means wherever he found lie over, lie over. That means it was there on the beach. That's why he just took it and of course did a packing. The wound. So here you can see that he packed the wound with the sea moss. You know what is the meaning sea moss? Sea moss that strewed the beach. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. So when he was doing packing the wound, he started to moan. You know what is the meaning moan? Moaning means crying or something, uttering some words with pain because of due to pain. The man moaned with pain in his stupor. Underline the word stupor here. Maybe in his unconsciousness, feelingness, feeling lessness. Are you right? Unconsciousness, stupor, but he did not awaken. Something he was just moaning, but he did not awaken. Then the best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea. Charava said, answering himself. Something, he was recognizing and of course justifying the situation. So he took his own time. Then he was just sharing with his wife. The best thing, you can also have a close to bracket, make an important symbol for even extract and of course textual questions. The best thing that we could do would be to put them back in the sea. So there was an answering himself. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up, then dusted the sand from his hands. Something he did some first aid like we can consider. So the very first thing he had done that, stopping the bleeding, right? Then he just stood up and of course he started to discuss that, and of course cleaning the dust. So now you can also see that now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and, of course, dusted the sand from his hand. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be best, Hannah said steadily. And of course, but she continues to stare down at the motionless man. She also agreed. She also agreed with Sadova, and of course, meanwhile, she also saw. She continued to stare, look down at the motionless man. Here you can have a close to bracket. Motionless man, maybe died man like, or still life, still. So motionless man who was injured and of course lied in front of him, right? And they started to continue. That means before taking a decision, they have to discuss. So here, if we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would be certainly died. Shadow said, "This is what the dilemma. You understand? If we sheltered a white man as a patient in our house, we should be arrested. Something we have done against of our country's rules, our nation's rules, and of course, we would be like traitors or betrayer, so we should be arrested. And of course, another chance. If we turned him over as a prisoner, he would be certainly died. That was it. You understand that? That was the dilemma. That was the dilemma. And the kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea. Hannah said. But neither of them moved. That means they were so sensitive, and of course they were so kind, so kind of them. They were so kind. That's why nobody moved. That's why here it was mentioned the kindest thing would be to put them back into the sea, even though Hannah said, but neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion. Underline the word curious repulsion. Maybe it's like dislike, repulsion. Underline the word dislike or hatred. Like for looking at an American, he was white. When we compare with the Japanese image, now you can understand that. So repulsion, curious repulsion upon the inert figure. Underline the word inert figure means maybe motionless and of course innocent and of course motionless. What is he? Hannah whispered. She asked, "What is he? What is he?" Hannah whispered. So after that, we can stop today, and tomorrow we will continue.